It is the top of the hour. That's what I have
Yes,
anyway.
sir.
So
Yep.
um, let's call the meeting to order. Dennis, was the meeting noticed by email or otherwise, please?
Yes, it was posted and boards and sent to all members.
Okay. And let's see if we have a quorum for the meeting since this is a board meeting. All those who are present say aye. Adam first.
Adam Lashinsky, aye.
Steve Dalton, aye.
Arlen Steuven, aye. We do have a quorum. Brad is in France at this point in time. So the only items on the agenda really are the approval of the two uh, uh, the budgets. And for that, I'd like Steve to make a motion first, and then I'll ask for a second, and then if there's any discussion. So go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Harlan. I'd like to make a motion to approve the 2025 operating budget as provided, I think in an email last night, as well as the reserve budget that we laid out for the next 5 years. Do I have a second?
Adam Lashinsky, seconds.
Okay. So let's have any discussion, or is there any discussion within the board? Any questions or comments within the board?
You want me to go through a little rundown here, Harlan?
So yeah, go ahead, Steve. I think that's a great idea. Go ahead and give people a
Okay.
little down.
All right. So by way of those who were not at the prior meeting, in essence, we saw some increases. I'm going to kind of cut this relatively short. The meeting, if you're interested in attending the prior meeting that was more detailed, that one's available on YouTube. I believe Dennis sent out a link for that for those that need to see that or like to see that. We had a relatively modest increase in our operating budget. That was primarily driven by the last 3 years. The increase in our insurance portion of our budget has been about $528,000. That's expressed as a percentage about roughly a 28 to 29% increase in our budget, exclusively based on insurance costs. So we went from somewhere around the range of 400 and some thousand, 500,000 up to about a tick over 1.2 million, again, exclusively on insurance costs. Our flood coverage has had a modest increase. Our wind coverage has had a crazy increase. We are hopeful, and one of the reasons why I didn't really necessarily target a substantial amount, in fact, any ending cash, is we have a very reasonable expectation after talking to our professionals that we'll see a decrease in our wind coverage that renews in May. So effectively, you'd have October, November, December, and you'd have 8 months of the higher premium and 4 months of what we were hoping for is a significantly reduced premium in wind coverage when we go to Citizens or wherever we go. We are a substantially better credit risk, insurance risk from wind coverage. In addition to the fact that from stem to stern, the entire project is now Miami-Dade, hurricane approved. Everything that we have passes Miami-Dade standards. We've spent a lot of money renovating and bulletproofing our resources, our elevator rooms, our electrical supply rooms, entirely new finishes, a lot of renovations that we're working on right now. So there's a lot of work that's been done. So we're really hoping that we're going to see a substantial decrease. In short, the increase in the operating budget is partially being offset by a reduction of the reserve budget. I took the reserve budget from 456 down to 400,000. I feel like that's justified because typically your reserve budget is there to replace and repair things that are decaying or depreciating physically. And honestly, we're doing so much work here that it's as Harlan and I talked about, it's the good news, bad news. The bad news is it's Hurricane Ian. The good news is we've basically decimated our reserve budget for all the projects that we had scheduled for the next 5 years. They're all being redone now. So we really took a hard look at the reserve budget, and really railing and parking lots about the only two major items that you'll notice are in there. So as everybody's always curious, over the last 3 years, I haven't increased the operating assessment, and I'm doing a very modest increase of about $600 on average per resident per year. So everybody will see their quarterlies increase roughly $150. So given what we've seen, $500 and some thousand increase in insurance, a really, really substantial rate of inflation over the last 2 to 3 years. We think the board's been extremely cautious and very careful with the owner's resources. That's really, we did have an increase, significant increase in a category of license, taxes, and permits. And a lot of that was income tax that we have to pay because of $300,000 of interest that we received as I allocated the reserve and the hurricane money into interest-bearing accounts. We got a lot of interest income, approximately $300 and some thousand of that over since the inception. We're seeing some pretty substantial increase across the board. We're going to see increases in utilities. You'll notice that our utility cost, everything it used to be allocated in sewer and water, and now it's Harlem's looking at the bill the other day, and they've decided for whatever reason Bonita Springs is allocating the whole thing towards water, which is fine with us. Still an increase. We've got savings in salaries and benefits. Obviously, we've got a lot of landscape work that we're going to have to maintain, but a lot of these costs are being borne by our hurricane renovation. So bottom line is we had a modest operating loss, roughly $114,000. The only things that changed between the draft that we sent out and this version, which is a final after it's ratified, is a $2,000 web maintenance contract, which we hadn't picked up, and a $2,000 admin contingency fee just as a placeholder there in case we need extra help. Moving on to the reserve budget. As you can see, we've really are hard pressed to come up with projects from, we're doing the fire suppression standpipes do need to be done. That's scheduled for 27. We have to be determined. I put a placeholder in there of roughly $250,000 for every year for 28, 29, and for 30. We don't know what our projects are going to be. Next year, as I referenced in the last meeting, we are next year going to be required to do a reserve study and probably another engineering study. And what we will do, in essence, is we'll start to allocate all of our long-term costs, like roof, like parking lot, like building need to be repainted, and we will take the useful life of those projects. We will divide it over the useful life, and let's just say, for whatever reason, a roof is $2 million, and that's a 20-year life. We'll take $100,000 and we'll drop it into the reserve budget. So really what we're going to start doing effective next year is we're going to really have grown-up adult budgeting for the reserve as predicated by the state of Florida, where we really will start to reserve for all of these future costs. We will build up our reserve fund so that we don't end up getting, like we did last time, hey, you know, you got to do a roof, here's an assessment. You have to do parking lot, here's an assessment. We're really hoping ultimately that the way we're doing the budget going forward will eliminate, by and large, unless we have something unusual, we will have budgeted for these items. And again, we reduced our reserve budget because we basically checked off everything off last year's reserve budget as a result of repairs through Hurricane Ian repairs. But that's basically it. Again, you're looking at about $130 per person, depending on what floor you're on, what size your unit, about $130 a quarter. And we think that's an extraordinarily moderate increase. And the board's been, you know, very careful with your money. Will continue to do so.
Thank you, Steve. Since there are no questions or comments from the board, do we have any questions or comments from the ownership?
This is Cheryl Newell. Steve, I just have one question for clarification. On the waterfall chart for the 2025, there's a number for 1,863,000 that looks like, I can't tell if it's for the SOTEC waterproofing, screen enclosures, or if that also includes built-in painting and common area floor. And then next to the painting, there's a $2 million number, which doesn't seem to be in the column where you're adding everything up. So maybe it's the 2,065,000 that shouldn't be there.
Now, Cheryl, let me address that. So part of this is because of the just the look and feel of it, whether a number is centered or the bottom or the top of the descriptor. The 2,665,987 was the original contract for frame of reference for the items listed.
Okay.
All of those 3 lines of items listed. Since we had to give a down payment in this last year, what is left is this 1,863,378.
Thank you. That clarifies it greatly.
For those 3 line items. Now we could, I mean, because it's not clear to you, maybe we should just delete the 2,065,987 and then I think there's an extra line there that maybe makes it a little confusing too, but that's the explanation for the numbers.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else questions? Anybody else with questions or comments?
This is Cheryl Newell again. One other comment. You have a down payment for the parking lot to start in 25 and continue in 26. Is that a really good number for basically we're talking about?
No, I can't tell you.
600,000?
You know what, Cheryl, when I was on the board, I would say about 10 years ago, we had a number for pure asphalt at somewhere around 350 and for pavers somewhere around I don't know, 700 or something along that line. So this is a very arbitrary number. We really do need to get bids for this, but until we know what we want, I really don't think it's wise for us to be asking people for bids. But now in terms of the timeline, we had a lot of trucks coming and going for a while yet. And so it seems logical to start it toward the end of next summer ish. And therefore there'll be a down payment. We know that that's typically what happens. And then there will be a second or maybe even a third payment. So that second or third payment could roll over into 26.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with your thought process. We should do the parking lot last once all the major construction and reconstruction's done, because you certainly don't want all those heavy trucks on a brand new parking lot that is certainly built to handle occasional trucks like the garbage trucks, but not every day, all day with multiples of them.
Right. And the owners have to decide what they want for the parking lot. So we just wanted to put in an arbitrary placeholder, given the numbers that we saw before. It may be totally wrong. Unfortunately, we've got, even with that, we've got nearly $1 million cushion there based on the other numbers. So hopefully.
I have a question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is Anne Marie, 358E. My question is that for fiscal year 2025, we have a contribution that is projected for the sale of 126C, which I know is a process to get, owner vote again. But there's also a projected $1 million for wind insurance settlement. And so if that doesn't settle in our favor, then there's going to need to be a special assessment to fund the reserve, or we're going to just increase HOAs?
Well, we would have to either delay a project, or we'd have to have another assessment to be able to address it. We are pretty confident. Steve, you want to talk about the projected wind insurance settlement?
Yeah, I'm so our wind insurance coverage has been really super frustrating. So we've in essence filed suit. We hired, first of all, a public adjuster to address this. They've gone back and forth literally for almost 2 years. We've hired Merlin Group. On the 26th, I'm going to be deposed in an EUO, or an examination under oath, which is one of the things that you have to go through. It'll be an all-day deposition on work that we've done so far, et cetera, whatever in essence, we feel like the insurance companies sort of just set up these roadblocks to keep from paying the claim. So they've already offered once, really technically twice, they've offered a sum of money to settle this, and we've rejected it out of hand. So we really feel like after this EUO, we're going to either go to mediation, or we're going to try and take this thing straight to court and file a motion. So we've hired an attorney to do this. The EUO, me testifying as part of that. And our attorneys are quite confident that we're going to come into a significant sum of money. It's just a matter of when. You can't reasonably expect us to pay what used to be roughly 250 to 300,000, and this year 800,000 for coverage that we can't even manage to get a claim on. This is the 5th worst hurricane in the history of South Florida. Mm-hmm. And to presume that there's no wind damage, even the initial, they came back and said, oh, there was damage, but you didn't even reach the deductible, is really just a farce. So we're proceeding through the legal path on the advice of our attorneys as well as our public adjusters. And again, we're pretty confident that we're going to come up with hopefully a very substantial amount of money, but we really felt like it was reasonable to book a potential receivable on the likelihood that settles. So yes, if we don't get that, then obviously things like, parking lot is going to get pushed back, walkway railing replacement and installation gets pushed back. That's 800,000 right there. And we think we'll have some other, we really feel like we'll have some other monies coming in from flood coverage as well. We have a pending really large supplemental claim that we're coming in against them with our public adjusters done a lot of work to put together a supplemental claim. So we've got more insurance proceeds to come.
Okay. My next question, also in the category of reserves, is that I know that there's a placeholder for the reserve study, which was planned for after the restoration work is done. There's also a placeholder for the engineering building integrity study, essentially what the Florida statutes call is the SIRS, report that's required. There's actually two things that the Florida statutes require from us. The structural integrity reserve study is one. The other is the milestone structural safety inspection. And I don't know if that's, if you've already contracted who the engineering is that's going to do the one and they've agreed to do both at the same time, or if there's going to be an additional charge, significant charge for that.
We think that we don't have any solid number yet. We haven't contracted anybody. We've spoken to just peripherally, we've spoken to Tracy Mosley, who sat through the state 2-day seminar based on this. He's ramped up on it. He's the same guy that came out and inspected all of our doors and windows and gave us certification for Miami-Dade missile compliance, and ultimately signed off to citizens that we were fully compliant. So he's one vendor that we'll consider. We'll consider other vendors, but we don't have to do that now. So we're going to wait until we get primarily done with the project before we do that.
Okay. I'll send the board some information about these reports and inspections that are required. From what I have learned so far, it's due by the end of this year, but we can ask the City of Bonita Springs Building Department for an extension.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions?
Nope. Amory, just so you know, I had our legal counsel send me the documentation to get to the new board. So you read my computer, I'm not around.
So we have a nice comment here from Holly. Thank you, Holly. Everything looks beautiful so far. So excited for everything to be completely done. Thank you for all for everything. Thank you, Holly. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, well then we have a motion, we have a second. I'd like to call for a vote on that motion. Adam, first, please. All those in favor say aye.
Adam Laschinski, aye.
Steve Dalton, aye.
Harlan Steuben, aye. Both the operating and the windfall reserve project budgets are passed. Thank you, everybody, for your input and for your time today. Obviously, you know, if things change, if you run across anything you're uncomfortable with, even though we have passed these, we're always welcome for input, because we're just doing the best we can. And, you know, I'm an ER doc, and you know, there's only so much that we can project and plan for, and I'm glad to have as many eyes as possible looking at things. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. I'm going to head on over to the Western Colorado slope.
Thank you, everyone.